Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narativ. Elon Musk claimed another political trophy today.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister.
After 9 years as Canada's prime minister, Justin Trudeau announced today that he'd be stepping down to make way for an election of a new Liberal Party leader and a showdown between the Liberal candidate and the Conservative Party's Pierre Poilievre. In his reaction, Donald Trump dispensed with the usual sympathies, instead declaring on Truth Social, many people in Canada love being the 51st state, as if Trump's much talked about proposed reunion with Canada and the United States had already happened. As we've been reporting here for months on Narativ, Trump's key benefactor, Elon Musk, has aligned with anti-democratic forces around the world, and especially Vladimir Putin of Russia. Today, for the very first time, European leaders took direct aim at what they said was Musk's election interference.
Il y a 10 ans, si on nous avait dit que le propriétaire d'un des plus grands réseaux sociaux du monde soutiendrait une nouvelle internationale réactionnaire et interviendrait directement dans les élections, y compris en Allemagne, qui l'aurait imaginé? C'est le monde dans lequel nous vivons et dans lequel nous avons à faire de la diplomatie.
France's Emmanuel Macron calling Musk's actions election interference. He was joined by the leaders of Germany and Norway. And this statement from Britain's Keir Starmer.
Because those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible are not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. We've seen this playbook many times, whipping up of intimidation and threats of violence, hoping that the media will amplify it. When the poison of the far right leads to serious threats, then in my book, a line has been crossed.
On tonight's show, we welcome back Dean Blundell of The Dean Blundell Show and Canada's leading disinformation expert. Together, we'll examine what happens when tech billionaires collect democratic leaders like trophies. And stay tuned to the very end. I'll show you exactly why joining the United States would be devastating for Canada's economy. The question tonight isn't whether Musk is hunting democracy, that's a given. It's whether democracy still has the power to hunt Musk. Marcus Kolga is a prominent Canadian documentary filmmaker, journalist, and human rights activist who specializes in Russian and Central and Eastern European issues. He's a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Kolga is also a leading expert on disinformation, digital communication, and international human rights. He's also the founder of DisinfoWatch. Marcus joins Dean and me from Ottawa. How are you? Thanks for being here tonight. What a real split-screen moment. We've had Trudeau's resignation, the leader of one of the most prominent international democracies resigning. And in the United States, Donald Trump being officially voted the president. The same machine that drove Kamala Harris away is the same machine that I would argue also drove Trudeau away.
I was patrolling the Russian information space actually this afternoon to see how they're reacting to it. I think the reaction on RT, other Russian platforms, is very much the same as we're seeing on several far-right platforms in North America and the Western world. Certainly the Russians are celebrating this moment. The headline was that the old world is crumbling and that there is a new order that's emerging, an illiberal one. And so they're quite happy with this sort of an outcome. And we've seen the same sort of a situation across Europe. The German government has collapsed. They're waiting election. Other nations in Europe, France is teetering. And this is just the latest trend of Western democracies, liberal democracies crumbling. And so I think the Russians and their allies on the far left and far right are certainly celebrating today.
Dean, you pointed out quite prophetically a few weeks ago exactly what was going to happen. And here we are. Trudeau has resigned. We're still waiting for this foreign interference report that's coming out in a few weeks. How do you see the Canadian decision there by Trudeau, and how do you put that into context for people to understand exactly where we are in terms of the fight for democracy around the world?
Yeah, great question. And happy to be on here with another gentleman, the only guy I know who, if he goes to Russia or China, gets arrested, by the way. Thank you. It's nice to see Marcus Kolga on the show.
I should actually point that out because Kolga over here is now on a sanctions list by the Chinese, and he's already famously on the Kremlin sanctions list.
Yeah, doing something right.
Dude, by the looks of it, America next. But to your point, and quite possibly England, I think you left England out of that mix of the authoritarian wave that is somehow now recapturing England through a gentleman named Elon Musk, which we'll get to. Everybody here is familiar with him. Happens every 70 years. I had a long conversation with Frank Graves, 70, 80 years, Frank Graves today, where you talk about populism taking over on behalf of liberal governments, right? It just happens every single time we get into a jackpot, and you get the bad actors that have the ability to tell the rest of the world, hey, this is how it works. Those are the Bolsheviks, us versus them. We're in that time. We're in the gilded age of peace and the gilded age of people having equity through the worlds that they live in, equity sharing, the gilded age of peace and quiet, and all the things that came with World War II and the victory over the Nazis. That is over. To your point, it is wild to watch. I think if you were ever married to the idea prior to today watching Justin Trudeau resign, and I have thoughts on that, I don't think it's as big a deal as a lot of people think it is. And I wouldn't necessarily tie it into what we saw with Kamala Harris and MAGA taking over America again. I think that was more strategic, and I'm sure we'll get to that in just a second. And Marcus, I'd love your thoughts too. But we live in a really interesting time, the time when history repeats itself, and you don't often think it will. I grew up in a time when my parents would tell me, my grandmother, who I just went and visited, she's 92. I'm like, tell me about the war. She's, I'll tell you all about the war. And she's like, Europe lost their minds. These people lost their minds. And then she would tell me stories of how they lost their minds and what they were told and who they were told they should line up behind and how angry they should be. And my God, we're just living it again. That's exactly where we are. So the disparity that we see when this wave of authoritarianism is coming over, which is really hid behind populism and self-interest, religion, and a bunch of different things, and the ideological war that's being fought and being won by the extreme right in a lot of cases that lines up with the extreme left, the extremes and authoritarianism. If you haven't been paying attention, reading guys like Kolga, listening to you, this is why I'm not surprised. You got a bunch of people today that are freaking out because Trudeau resigned. And again, we'll get to why that's strategic. But I'm not surprised because if you've been paying attention, this has been a concerted effort that has been going on for the last decade and a half. And if you're Russia, it's been going on for the past 30 years.
There's a lot in that answer you just gave us, Dean, that deserves a lot of attention. But let's talk about Trudeau specifically, because why do you think it's just strategic? Why do you think it's not such bad news? After all, he's been the leader in Canada for 10 years, a fixture on the international stage. He's trusted by a lot of people around the world, even if he's not trusted at home as much. He's a real figure. For him to go, there's a vacuum for sure in certainly the G8 and beyond.
There is, and Marcus would be better to answer that question. Would you say fatigue? We've seen Justin Trudeau really outrun his welcome. We've seen the effects of some really shitty policies, some gimmicks. Economically, he hasn't been the best prime minister we've ever had, the second worst economic prime minister to Stephen Harper. But I think for a lot of people, it's strategic in a sense where, hey, listen, he's hated so much. If you were hoping to stop authoritarianism, people are going to vote against him for authoritarianism who actually line up on the liberal side of the ledger. So they're going to have to get rid of him because he is that much of a cancer in perception. That's my thought, Marcus. I'd love yours too.
I think this is a perfect case of perhaps considering term limits on prime ministers in this country. 10 years is a long time. Stephen Harper was around for 10 years and he faced a change as well. It's perfectly normal for any sort of democracy after 10 years to want a change. And that's what we're seeing here. But yeah, I think you're right. After being there for 10 years, internationally, Justin Trudeau became a symbol for progress and for the liberal movement worldwide. But he also became a sort of a lightning rod for the sort of anti-woke movement as well. And I know from monitoring information spaces throughout North America and in Europe as well, when these narratives were emerging, say 4 years ago, Justin Trudeau was often mentioned, whether you're looking at the far right in Estonia or in Italy, it didn't matter where. Trudeau was a symbol for the far right and was a lightning rod for them. But that change that we saw today, I think is perfectly natural and it would happen in any sort of democracy. 10 years is a long time.
Certainly, if you imagine Elon Musk sitting in his office there at X with a bunch of heads of hunted animals that he's collected, he would now have Biden up there. He would have Kamala Harris up there. He'd have Trudeau up there. He's certainly aiming at the British Prime Minister and the German Chancellor at the same time. But there is something unusual beyond just democracy happening around the world, beyond just tenure. You've got people there who are trying on a mass scale, billionaires, people in power, people in authority figures, who knows what they are, China, Russia, let's call them the enemies of democracy. They're all trying to take down these leaders, and these individual leaders of these specific countries are powerless against this machine that Putin and Musk and company have put together.
I would just say that I think that we've seen this trend ongoing for the past number of years, I'd say even a decade. And unfortunately, I don't think that we've mustered up the courage to stand up to it, to call it out. That's been a real problem over the past decade. Are we prepared to start doing so? That's what it's going to take. It's the courage, finding the courage to call these people out, to hold them to account, whether it's Elon Musk or anyone else on the far left or far right, engaging in this sort of political behavior and polluting our information spaces. If we don't call it out, we're just going to allow it to continue happening.
Is calling it out enough? The pace of this seems to be so quick. We would have expected it to leave so quickly, and now here he is. Same thing is happening in the UK. The pace of change is quite dramatic over there in terms of the Labour Party's popularity. Do you think we have enough time just to call it out? It's a machine that's just rolling over everything, it seems.
Yeah, I feel like we're losing. We have been losing for the past few years. The time to start calling it out and holding these actors to account, that time may have passed already. And
I think we lost.
Right.
Don't you think we lost?
We should accept that.
Yeah.
It's hard to accept defeat, you know?
I don't think we've lost, at least not in Canada. I think there's still an opportunity to push back. We've got a few months of time at this point, and I don't think we've lost here, but I think we are Western democracies, Western liberal democracies. Yeah, we are losing.
Mm-hmm. It will be Canada's the last stand of democracy around the world. Certainly Germany, Britain, of course, amongst them. But it's going to be Canada, really, I think, that's going to have to prove to the world that we can stand up for democracy. And it's a question of whether we certainly don't have in the Conservative Party a leader that looks to be a beacon of democracy. He certainly seems to be someone who might be elected without even a security clearance, which is something that the media is ignoring completely.
The resignation today creates a vacuum of sorts, a real political vacuum. It does it instantly propels the Bloc Québécois, which is a separatist party, to official opposition, unofficial opposition status if the election were held today, right? So they're separatists. Then you've got people that are involved in the Canadian government, which would be the Conservative government, a Poilievre-led government, if he does become Canada's next prime minister. And there's a great chance of that, lesser a chance that he makes it all the way to the next election because of some other stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of national security, an outside chance of that. But it upsets the fruit basket and the natural order. And so you've got a separatist government, separatist opposition, if the election were held today, that doesn't want to be part of Canada. They want to have their own country. So that changes the tenor and the nature of almost every conversation that we'd have in the House. There's that I find to be an interesting wrinkle. And then that's going to upset separatism or put that on afterburners out in Alberta and Western Canada for what they're calling Wexit, which is like the West wants to exit Canada, and they'll get pissed off because Quebec's going to be the official opposition. And then you're going to have a fight between a political party that manages this country that is largely centered, the epicenter of the heartbeat of that thing is in the West, and it's supported by a bunch. So you've got real sovereignty and national security and issues with Canada breaking up from the get-go, if this is indeed the case and if we have an election tomorrow. What it does for the other parties that I find really interesting, I don't know, because Trudeau seemed to be the cancer that carried the Liberal Party into the toilet that it is currently in, where it's got like a 19% approval rating, down from 33% 2 years ago. It's just plummeting like a rock. And the Conservative government, or the Conservative government in waiting, has done a marvelous job gaslighting him, attaching every ill that everybody has to liberalism and all its discontents and malcontents, whether it be DEI or everything that we've seen. It's all a gas. And the NDP, they're the most feckless group of morons I've ever seen in a political party. Jagmeet Singh stood up. I don't know, you see that today, Colga? Jagmeet Singh stood up there and they're all a bunch of dicks. And you're like, he's so bad at politics. It's crazy. But it really changes the political landscape going into an election year, where on January 31st, you've got a national security report from the Hogue Commission, which Mr. Colga was instrumental in, coming out, that talks about a lot of foreign interference into Canadian politics, specifically focusing on the Conservative Party, as I understand it. Marcus, is that correct?
There's a bit of it going around everywhere.
All the parties are going to get called out, or do you think it's just the Conservatives?
There's a lot of this going around. Both Liberals and Conservatives have exploited this and have benefited from it. And so I think there'll be a bit of that for both parties. But I think that what we're headed for is a year of complete political uncertainty, potential instability. And we have to be prepared for our enemies to take advantage of this and exploit it. They've been waiting around for this sort of golden opportunity. So we've got 3 months of a leadership campaign coming. Then we've got an election. Parliament may only sit for a few months this coming year. And so that sort of uncertainty is it's going to be a golden opportunity for our enemies. And we need to be prepared for Russia, other adversaries, China, to take advantage of that and just flood our information space with all sorts of conspiracies and disinformation, and for the far left and the far right to start, they're going to continue amplifying it in our political environment.
I might be an outlier here, but to me, they're orchestrating all of this. You've got these foreign players who are basically determining whether Trudeau is popular or not by using these social networks that they've now acquired and have such reach into the media landscape. You've got the Chinese are clearly involved in at least one of the parties here in Canada. The Indians are involved. They certainly, all of where we're at right now feels to me like they're all foreign puppets basically being manipulated into the situation we're in. And then, of course, it'll create an opportunity because they're manipulating the entire environment. So it creates an opportunity for them to use.
Look, I'm not sure that they're all puppets, but they're all vulnerable to it and they're all benefiting from it to a certain degree. It requires courage to stand up to it, to call it out. And I just don't see that we are prepared to do that. Even with this report coming out at the end of January, I'm not sure that it's going to make much of a difference. And we'll have to see how bold the commissioner is in calling any of this out herself.
Mm-hmm. When this report comes out January 31st, and everybody's making a big deal out of it, like it's going to be the death knell for this party, the death knell for this leader, you're absolutely going to find out that this leader and this person was working with this government.
No, I don't think that we're going to get much more information than we already have, to be quite honest. The bombshell revelations really came in the first half of the inquiry. There wasn't much that was new other than the fact that we heard from diaspora communities and how transnational repression may be affecting them. But anything else in terms of our democratic processes, I don't think we heard anything particularly new. And so I don't expect there to be much coming out in the report at the end of January.
So then what's the heat why do the Conservatives want so badly? Because Justin Trudeau, to what we were talking about earlier, Zev, Justin Trudeau didn't call an election today. They didn't dissolve government, right? So there is no election. They prorogued Parliament, I believe, until late March 24th, 25th, while they do a leadership bid. So what has been the rush for Conservatives to call an election as opposed to go the way that Trudeau and the Liberals did today, which was simply resign? Is it wrong to assume that they wanted to avoid the foreign interference report coming out? Because that seems to be a big trigger. Or is it just their popularity is so enormous right now to take advantage of that would be the only thing that they could do because they don't want to run out of runway? Like, what is the push behind calling an election right now?
I suspect that they're looking at the polling numbers, right? The numbers are just so incredibly high right now. I think that if there was an election held today, you would see a historically huge majority for the Conservatives. Why would you want to wait it out? Those numbers might change. I don't think that those numbers are getting any better or too much better for the Conservatives than they are right now. So I think that rush to hold an election is just to take advantage of those polling numbers. I don't think that there is going to be any sort of real bombshell in that report, especially not about the Conservatives. Now, is it possible that there might be new information coming out about foreign interference in our electoral processes from some other source? Absolutely. That is possible. It's not going to be the inquiry though.
You don't think that the inquiry in the paper that comes out from this inquiry or any of the results that we're going to find on the 31st would affect the fortunes of Pierre Poilievre or the Conservative Party?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So you think we could have a prime minister who does not have security clearance?
I think so.
Wow.
What a country.
You are going to run out of places to hide, Mr. Douglas. And I got to warn you.
European passports.
Yeah.
So do I, which is really cool because I've said some pretty gnarly shit about Mr. Poilievre. You go the way of authoritarianism. I'm going to get sanctioned in my own country. Dean, you're not allowed to go get milk today. You've been sanctioned from buying milk. Oh, thank you very much. I find it interesting because the full court press around the national security and NSICOP report and is it the Hogue Commission? I find the ridiculousness around the push to get to an election like right now seems to coincide with the waves of information that used to anyway, with the waves of information we used to get every time we'd get a new bombshell where it's like, oh, Modi ordered the killing of a couple of people and they supported the leadership of Pierre Poilievre. Is this just the business of conspiracy theorists working in reverse? Or is there something there, do you think? As a disinformation expert and someone that keeps his eye on that kind of stuff, I don't know who to believe anymore. And I'm in the space, right?
And this is the problem, right? And this is exactly what at least our foreign adversaries are, the environment they're trying to create, where we just don't know what's true and we just don't know who to believe anymore. Yeah, look, I think that given all that we've heard about foreign interference over the past 12 to 24 months, I think everyone, especially partisans, will try to attribute various different issues to different parties. They will try to exploit them. I just don't see this being at least in terms of the inquiry, a major problem for any of the parties. And I don't think it'll be a huge problem for the Conservatives. But like I said, it's entirely possible that other sources will reveal information about either party, both parties. I think there's a lot that we don't know. And I think there's a lot that didn't get exposed in the inquiry that may come out over the next few months. And that may impact either or both parties. So I think we'll have to wait and see what comes out from these various different journalists who are working on these issues. It's just not going to be the inquiry.
So let me ask you guys, who do you think in the Liberal Party is best positioned to take over as leader in this environment? I mean,
does it really matter?
No. You think the whole mood is just about getting the Liberals out of power? It doesn't matter.
Pardon my French.
Yeah.
They're fucked. The Liberal Party's toast, Marcus. No way. Like, it's a matter of 15 to 30 seats, who they pick. Like, they're going to be decimated. Like, Justin Trudeau, for all intents and purposes, has Kim Campbelled this party.
Wow.
Mulrooney.
A verb.
Would you not? I know she's a verb now. Would you not say that? Does it matter who they install? There's no.
It really doesn't matter. Is there anyone who can stop the bleeding? As far as the polling that I've seen over the past week or so, it seems that it could be Chrystia Freeland. Could Carney help? I don't know. I think Carney is red meat for the Conservatives. He's part of the elite. He's part of the establishment. I think that if I'm Pierre Poilievre, he's exactly the guy I want them choosing. And so,
that's a gatekeeper right there.
It's either one of those two, I think. I didn't see anybody else on the horizon. Carney seems to be more, I think he'd light up people a little bit more than Chrystia Freeland, but Chrystia Freeland is very popular. So neither of them are Trudeau, to be honest, in terms of their charisma or their ability to capture the attention of the world. Neither of them is Justin Trudeau. When you think about it, he has been a